Yeah, we're good. Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 82. I'm delighted today to be joined by the lead sports scientist at Aston Villa, Jack Sharkey. Jack, how's things?
Very good, thank you. Very good. Bit cooped up at home, but aside from that, can't complain.
Very good. I really appreciate you giving up the time and coming on, mate. I know I've listened to a lot of your work and a lot of your talks and presentations recently, and I know it's something that we might reference in the episode with your episode with Rob recently, and then the webinars that you've done. So I really appreciate you coming on to discuss what we're going to discuss.
Yeah.
So
thank you very much, Nathan. It's a pleasure being on the podcast. I've heard a lot about the work you do and listened to a number of podcasts and found them quite interesting. So it's an honour to be asked on.
Awesome, mate. So just kick us off, Jack. I've just mentioned your current role, lead sports scientist at Aston Villa, but just take us through your career so far.
Okay, so I suppose I came from an academic route. I wasn't an ex-player or anything like that. I did my undergraduate in sports science, but based on outdoor sports at Bangor University in Wales. It had nothing to do with professional sport or anything like that. It was to do with mountaineering, climbing, that sort of thing, leadership skills. So at that time in my career, I had no real aspirations to work in professional sport. Following that, I had a year out working in a gym and being an outdoor instructor as well. And then it wasn't until I went to Loughborough University to do a master's in exercise physiology where that drive to work in professional sport came, really. Anyone who's been to Loughborough, or I'm sure everyone's aware of it, it's a fantastic university to go to learn about top-end athletes and working with the best athletes in the world, and the opportunities you get from that environment will sculpt the career that you have. While there, I did an internship with the Nike Academy. So that was a skiing part run by Nike and part run by the Premier League, or the FA, sorry, where they took kids from clubs who'd just been released from academies and things like that and gave them a second opportunity to try and get back in the game. So that's where I first started working with football and groups of athletes. And then following graduation from there, I was looking for a few jobs. I sent a few letters out, and I approached my local club, Burton, and it was coincidentally, it was the same time that Gary Rowett was just starting his managerial career. And Gary, being the forward-thinking manager that he is, he wanted a sports science department, he wanted an analysis department, which the club didn't have at the time. And my letter came at that right time. So I went in, sat down with him, had a conversation with him, and he gave me my first opportunity in professional football. So I was very lucky, in a sense, to be in at the right place at the right time to get my foot in the door. The good thing as well, obviously, coming out of university and into a club with no real sports science support structure in place already, Gary Rowett said it himself. He said, you've got a clean slate basically to do whatever you like. So that was a great opportunity for me to learn the trade, learn apply what I'd learned at university into that real life setting, figuring out for myself what worked and what didn't work. Those 4 seasons at Burton Albion, probably one of the most enjoyable in my career so far, like literally having not a massive amount of resources, working with a very small team. It was a good experience, and I'll always remember those days fondly. So during that time, obviously there was a change of management. Gary Rowett went to Blues because we were doing well. Then Jim Floyd Hasselbank came in. Obviously, again, we just kicked on the success from the groundwork that Gary had put in, but obviously Hasselbank himself really took it to another level and got back-to-back promotions to the champ. During that time, Jimmy went to QPR. Nigel Clough came in as well, so I got an opportunity to work with him. And it came to the summer after that second promotion where I had Gary Rowett at Blues and Hasselbank at QPR offering me positions. And I chose to go to QPR with Hasselbank. Obviously, spent a season there. There was a change of management. Holloway came in. And then at the end of that year, I heard of this opportunity at Aston Villa to come to be lead sports scientist there. It was close to home, and at the time it just felt the right move for me to take. And 3 seasons now, and this is where I am today. So that's a quick crash course of how I've got to where I am now from academia. It's not the same route that everyone's taken, but this is how I've got to my position in the Premier League now.
And I've heard you speak recently on Rob's podcast about the approach to Burton. And I'm sure many people will be in the same boat, that they've sent letters out to clubs. And it probably sounds from a lot of people like it's really smooth that you sent this letter and you just appeared in this job. And I know there's been setbacks and struggles along the way. So do you want to touch on some of those? And just initially, actually, just expand on that story with approaching Burton, because a lot of people will be in the same boat. They'll be trying to reach out for this first opportunity, and it's not always as easy as just contacting clubs. And I know that's how it worked for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was very fortunate in that sense. But just because of the career path I've had, and on an outside perspective, it might seem that I've been successful in a sense to go from that level to where I am now. But don't get me wrong, there was a lot of failures along the way. So that even from the internship level, when I got to the Nike Academy, I don't mention that before that I got rejected from a number of internships at different sports, from cricket, swimming, triathlon, all these different organisations that wouldn't even touch me. So after a fourth or fifth failure of trying to get into these internship positions and seeing other people get them, I had to think outside the box a little bit, because the one thing that I was lacking was that experience to even get that internship position. But at the same time, how do I get that experience without the internship? So I was stuck in a catch-22. So the way I went around it at the time was, there were people on the master's course who were aspiring athletes as well. So one of the people I worked with was Crystal Lane. She's a GB paracyclist, for those who don't know. And I offered my services to her to do gym work with her, start to get that experience with her. And then I got to understand the processes that people followed to try and get, to prepare for the Paralympic Games in 2012. It allowed me to observe what was happening with GB cycling as well. And then I got my experience. So when I went to that internship opportunity with Nike, I had a little bit more substance to my application. And there's loads of athletes out there who aren't at the top of the game but need that support, who haven't got the resources or funding at the moment. And things like that haven't changed. And I used that to broaden my CV. Albeit when I applied to Burton, that was a bit of luck, a bit of chance. But that, you sometimes have to think outside the box to try and get that experience first before you move on. Actually, working in the football environment as well. When people get promoted or they have success, they're more than keen to tell you about it via social media and other platforms. But one thing that you have to accept as part and parcel of the job is failure. And I think from my own experiences, those failures are necessary to actually get that subsequent success. So with Burton Albion, there was back-to-back promotions, but the previous year, we lost in the final against Fleetwood at the playoff final in League Two. The year previous to that, we lost in the playoff semi-finals against Bradford. So we had 2 successive years of getting to the playoffs and failing, and that's what, it could have crushed us, but it actually made us stronger as a group to actually, in that third year, to actually just go on a run and get out of those lower 2 leagues. So you need those failures as well. So even with Aston Villa, obviously we got promoted into the Premier League last year. Season before, we lost in the playoff final against Fulham. So you have to have these experiences to build on and make you stronger and understand what hasn't and has worked to actually lead to further success. No one is going to come out of university or be an applied practitioner and know what it takes to win without having experienced those failures in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's something that probably a lot of people overlook, isn't it? That teams will go through a lot of different experiences before achieving success a lot of the time, but it's how you reflect on it and how you act on it, isn't it? So what's the sort of process from your point of view in your role when you've been through these times with clubs? You get to the end of the season and it might end in staying in the league or whatever it is. What's your process or your mindset from that point?
What, when there's failure? Or success?
Well, both really, both.
I suppose, if I'm being brutally honest, when you have the failure, you need that period where you completely switch off. You need a period to. We have celebrations when we have promotions and we have celebration parties, but I've probably been more drunk after failures, to be honest. So you have that time where you reflect and you feel bad on yourself and you lick your wounds and you feel rubbish. But it's over time you start to look back and reflect, like, what was wrong on that particular day? What did we do differently? What can we do next time? And one of the biggest driving stimulus for a player's motivation that you can really tap into is that failure and people thinking that they're not good enough. I found that you can use that so much with a player to motivate them to prove people wrong. I think proving people wrong is a massive motivational tool that we need to be using with these players. Because like I said, by having these failures, they're coming into the next stage with something to prove to the people who don't feel they're capable of playing at that higher level of the competition, saying, okay, you're not good enough to go to the league above, and we're going to prove them wrong. We're going to take it to a next level. I remember Gary Rowell during the post-match or pre-match motivation talks sometimes. He used to do it where he'd get the local paper and he'd read what the manager or what the press have said about this team, if it's negative, not all the time, just a handful of times. And that spurred us on. It spurred us on to say, you know what, that's what they think of us, we're going to prove them wrong. And even with the promotion we got with Burton, the first one, was it the first one? Yeah, so Walsall were close on our tails to getting into the playoffs as well. I know this was, when we went from League One to the Champions. Walsall had come out in the press and said that Burton will be sat there drinking their tea and biscuits, not worrying about us, but we're going to close them down. One lad had read this in the paper. He was fuming. He was absolutely fuming. And all the lads got together and they were so angry about this article that had come out. And it really drove us forward to make sure that we weren't going to go into the playoffs and we were going to get automatic promotion. And I remember after the game, all the players were sat there with the tea and biscuits for the first picture after we got promoted to prove a point. So, yeah, you need to use those, what people think of you, to prove them wrong sometimes. And that only comes sometimes by having failed in the first place. So, yeah, there's certainly ups and downs, but that's part and parcel of the job. You have to appreciate that. It's how you come through it, which will dictate how your career will unfold.
And do you think that relates as well to practitioners? Because we're talking there from a player point of view or a team point of view, but as a practitioner as well, proving people wrong.
Yeah. It's part and parcel of the job that you will doubt yourself on a regular basis. There's no practitioner really who hand on heart can say they know all the answers, because anyone who says that is usually wrong or too naive in their career to understand where they're at. But you need to learn from those mistakes. I've certainly made mistakes along the way with the return to play process of players, with maybe pushing players a little bit too hard in certain situations by not listening. But you need to learn from those mistakes and move on. I remember a story at Burton. I remember doing this running session. I won't name the player, but I remember having a big bust up with him because he wasn't applying himself in the running sessions. And he was a senior player as well, so it was quite a big bust up at the time. And at the time, I was distraught. I came away from it thinking about it, dwelling on it, thinking, oh, God, he's never going to look at me the same way. He's going to think of me badly. How am I going to get this work to work in the future? At the time, you don't show that, but you think it behind the scenes. And anyway, he came into the treatment room after that session and just potted about as if nothing happened. I says, can we talk about earlier? Can we just lay it on the table, get a dress so we can move on? And he didn't understand what I was on about. And it's from a player's perspective, and this was very early in my career, it's just part and parcel of football. You take that hit, you move on, and the next day you'll be fine again. And that's something you need to learn quite quickly as a practitioner and as the players themselves, because you will take a hit, you will have a defeat, but you have to move on quickly. You can't dwell on it. You just get on with it. And that was a big lesson for me in my career development. It's just get on with it, basically.
I think that's a great bit of advice, and something that we probably only learn through experience as well, isn't it? And going through these times, like you just named, some actual events that have happened. But I wanted to ask Jack, in terms of working with different managers, and you don't necessarily need to name names, but when managers present a performance question to you that they want X or Y out of their team, what's your approach to that? What's your mindset going into planning the phases of training?
Well, I think we're quite lucky in a sense. One thing that's worked for me as a practitioner certainly is we can be completely objective about the situation. We don't need to be concerned about how they played technically or performance-wise or anything like that. Our responsibilities as sports scientists, which I think a lot of people forget sometimes, is ultimately we're capable for the physical performance of that team, the athletic ability of that team. That's certainly what my training's been done. It's about exercise physiology and how best to prepare them for that performance. So when we come to these performance-based questions that I'm generally asked, it's to do with how do we best prepare them physically for competition. So it's quite black and white sometimes when you say, this is the amount of training they've done, this is what we need to do to get to a higher level, or play at the level which you expect them with that particular style of play. So it's important that you don't fall into the trap of being subjective and opinion based. You need to, not all the time, but for the most part, have that objectivity through testing and monitoring to validate your argument and support the reason that you're giving towards the coaches. And that helps a lot. I've seen practitioners in my time fail because they fail to grasp that they're not a coach, they're not the manager, they're not there to make those type of decisions. We're there to support the players, support the coaching staff to best physically prepare these players for competition. You will get these questions now and again that maybe go into a different area, and you can give your opinion then when they ask. But it's important to always have that objectivity that you when you present your answers to these coaches.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard you talk before on subjective opinions in terms of RPEs, and I know you went into detail with Rob, but just want to touch on that, on your views, because this comes from your experience as well.
Yeah. So back in the day when I was working in League Two, and like I said, with limited funding and resources, and having that blank canvas to do whatever you pleased, I tried loads of things that didn't really work for me, and I felt like they were a waste of time at that particular moment when I could be investing my time in other areas. And one thing at that particular time, rightly or wrongly so, was I started doing RPs, which you learn about at university, and getting daily scores and subjective scores and daily monitoring questionnaires, how they're sleeping, things like that. And I was spending a lot of my time going around the players asking these questions, when at that particular time, because I had so many other responsibilities, basically leading the group sessions, taking for warm-ups, doing the match preparation, all this type of work, and then I was going around asking these questionnaires, you could just tell that the players, one, were giving false responses because they felt that it would influence their selection, or how they were perceived by the coaches, and certainly us. And I ended up just getting rid of it, and I overlooked those subjective scores because with that small group environment, you got to know them personally as well. So there's a lot of players I still keep in contact from those years, because of the relationships I had with those particular individuals. That being said, with larger departments and multidisciplinary departments, you might not have that contact with the players. I certainly don't probably have that closeness that I had with that smaller backroom staff department that I had before with the players. But I just kind of pushed that away because of that environment and overlooked it. So yeah, there are certain things that I've overlooked in the past, but only because that time and situation meant that I needed to.
And just what I wanted to go into next is just talking us through some successful strategies that you've implemented at Villa, at your current club, but also previously throughout your career so far.
Okay, so I'd say probably one of the most successful in terms of monitoring and strategies has been the work surrounding quantifying training for the coaches and building that relationship with them. That is an obstacle that a lot of practitioners have, is having that ability to communicate effectively with coach and player. One way that has worked for me is the concept of a multimodal or multimechanical approach to quantifying training. For those who are unaware of that practice, it's basically taking the individual metrics that you monitor from training and combining them together to create an absolute score of volume and intensity relative to a game. So post a session, you can go to a coach and say, today's session was 60% volume of the game, but we did it at 100% intensity. Or you may go to a coach and say, okay, that particular possession drill or that particular small-sided game, or your defensive back four and your central midfield players, the intensity is replicable of what they do in the game. It's 100% intensity, but your wide players and forward are only working about 6% intensity of the game. So what can we do to make sure they're training how we want them to play at a weekend? Because one common theme that I found with the coaches I've worked with is that every coach wants to train how they play. They want to train with intensity. I've been lucky in that sense. So this model and this way of presenting training load data to the coaches has fit into that model, or that philosophy, should I say. So that's been a successful model for me that has certainly worked with the players and coaches. But yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. And I keep referencing the podcast with Rob because I have listened to that you did with him, and you went into great detail on the multi-mechanical model. And if anyone wants to go and check that out, I'll put the link in the show notes so that they can go and listen to that. And we did say we were going to talk about a lot of things. We didn't want to repeat exactly what you went through in the podcast with Rob, but I do urge people to go and listen to it because you've gave a great insight there into the model and what you've created. But I think it's really, really beneficial for coaches, and that is a problem that a lot of coaches have, isn't it? The ability to communicate what they want in the right way.
Yeah, well, the reason that this model and approach has resounded with me quite a lot is because I was of the same mindset. I was constantly regurgitating these single metrics. I still do, and it's still important that you look at these metrics in isolation, like total distance, the volume of high-speed running, the volume of sprint distance, and things like this. But the way that I was presenting at the time was just these individual metrics in isolation, and the message I was trying to get to the coaches wasn't what I wanted it to be. They were getting to the stage where they were looking at it and saying, okay, they've done 7-8 kilometres, so that's good. It had no context whatsoever to the game of football, and it frustrated me in a sense because if you're looking at these metrics in isolation, they don't show that that session was particularly good or worthwhile to prepare them for the game. That we as practitioners could go out and do those distances, but it doesn't mean we're prepared best for the game. But you need to look at it in relation to the other metrics together. And it felt better for me. I felt more confident in what I was saying to the coaches rather than just regurgitating numbers and sheets. And you tend to find if you're just going in day out with these sheets with no real action to take from it, it's pointless. It's completely pointless. So this approach led us to have discussions that would influence practice, and that is the crux of it. What we're doing must influence practice, otherwise what is the point of what we're doing? So that is the fundamental message that I'd give to sports science practitioners when they're having this blue sky thinking or reflective time. Just think, what are we actually changing the game? Are we actually improving these players? That's what you should be asking of yourself with everything you do with these players.
Yeah, that ties in a lot with the communication between the staff members, doesn't it? Going up to head coaches or managers and their philosophies. I think they were one of the ones, I don't know whether it was recently, but a few years ago was the stats that came out about Barcelona on the distance covered, and it wasn't the highest, but they were winning leagues and Champions Leagues and all the rest of it. So if you're taking that single metric and wanting them to cover more ground, but they're winning everything, it's context is absolutely key, isn't it?
Yeah. And I felt this just gives it a little bit more context to what you're doing. Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, these have been some positive things that you've put in place. And it's a tough one for people to discuss, but what about some things that haven't worked quite as well?
Yeah, I suppose there's been a number of things over the years that you employ that have probably been a waste of time. There are certain things that still frustrate me to a sense with the applied work I do and some of the arguments against what we're doing. So, for instance, plyometrics is a key one on the pitch. I've come across a number of people who disagree that athletes aren't strong enough to do some of the plyometric work we do on the pitch, and they need to get strong within the gym first before you do it. But then, in a sense, if you digress too much and not do anything until that athlete is perfect to do it, then you'll never actually end up doing it, certainly once the season started. So I kind of just overlook that and just do it anyway, rightly or wrongly so. I suppose a lot of my queries and things that work and don't work come around that S&C environment. The whole aspect of Nordics, I've gone on for ages about that, with whether they're beneficial or not. From my own experiences, I found it conflicts the evidence massively. But that's for another time. I won't get into that because it will just start a heated debate that I can't be dealing with right now. But yeah, there's certainly things that I'll hold my hand up that I've done wrong in the past that I would do differently now. But like I said at the start of the talk, without those learning curves and experiences, I wouldn't be the practitioner I am today. And I'm sure there are things I'm doing now that will be incorrect, that I'll look back in 5 years' time and think, why the hell was I doing that?
saw an amazing quote recently, and I can't remember who it's from, so it's an absolutely shocking thing to bring up. But it tied in with this in terms of drawing from other people's experiences, and that we do have to make mistakes. We do have to go through these experiences of making mistakes, but at the same time, and this will tie in with the next question really, there's a lot of people out there like yourself that have been through different leagues. They've experienced different budgets, different, like I said, different leagues, different teams, different managers, and we can learn from them, can't we? There's a lot of things that we can take, but at the same time, we do need to experience it ourselves, don't we? So I think that's quite an important thing, that you have to go through those experiences to come out the other side, don't you?
Yeah. You have to take away from your own experience. But I think that also stresses the reason to learn from senior players and other practitioners as well. Because one thing I always put towards some of the young players I work with, I've always found from my own experiences that the players who have relationships with the senior players within the group tend to have a longer career and tend to be more applied in the work that they do. And so with societies, from whether that's senior players or senior coaches, managers, you have to learn from their experiences. And a lot of my development has come from sitting down, having those conversations with those senior pros like John Terry, Glenn Whelan, Jim Floyd Haskell and Rao, all the managers you work with, the senior ex-players as well. Rory Lab, Mila Jedinak, all these ex-pros who've been in the game for so long that the information you get from them is invaluable. So you have to, while that opportunity is there, speak to them, learn from them. Don't get me wrong, you can still help them, but at the same time, you can gain a lot from their experiences as well.
I think that can be mutually beneficial, can't it? Because I'm sure a lot of the listeners, if you think about your current situation and your squad, and possibly the different nationalities and the different leagues that covers, and then the experiences that they've been through, there is a lot that you can take from them, isn't there? And that's not to say, like you've just said, that's not to say that you can't improve them. That's just to say that you drop the ego and you openly discuss things and try and learn from them. Yeah.
But you tend to find those players who are at the more senior aspect of their career. They're willing to have these conversations with you. They've been in the game that long, that they've spoken to many practitioners and seen so many different things, that it's good to finally get that opinion from them, because they're probably going to be a little bit more reluctant to do that earlier on in their career. And you can have some really great conversations with these people and take a lot from the work that you're doing. And like I said, to get the younger players to learn from that as well is invaluable. I've seen firsthand players who have had that shift and had more involvement with those senior players. Take Jack Grealish, for instance, a couple of seasons ago, where you had in that environment a lot of senior pros, and after training they'd be doing head tennis in the changing room with JT and Snodgrass. He'd be there for hours after training, and it just had a positive effect on the way he went about training, and that was a very successful year for him. So there's no question that you need to tap into these senior players, and the fact that they're having a push to try and get these senior pros into coaching roles as well will only benefit the game.
And a seamless link here, Jack, in terms of talking about players learning from experienced players. We're going to talk about practitioners learning from experienced practitioners. So what about yourself? Who's been some big influences on your career?
I suppose from practitioner-wise, like I said, when I went into my first club, there was no other sports scientists there, so it was difficult to learn other than from the coaches themselves and the physio who was there. So that's maybe why it's driven me to learn so much from them. But probably the most notable practitioner I've worked with, who I've taken most from, would be Chris Barnes. I feel he is obviously one of the forefathers of sports science within football, and his way of assessing and analysing the game has always been about giving it context. He did a talk recently with the MDT performance webinar with Steve Barrett, and that's fascinating in my sense, the way he tries to quantify the game into mechanical and locomotive loads and bringing them together. But yeah, I'd say Chris Bonds has probably been one of the most influential practitioners on my journey so far, and he's great to just ring up and have a chat and go for a beer with, and just pick his brains on different things. But yeah.
What about any others, mate? Any others, not just in terms of sports science, but in terms of other people that have had an influence, like learning from outside of sport, outside of football, looking at sport as a whole, or is there anyone else?
I've taken from a great deal of practitioners. I try and regularly visit clubs and other sporting organisations, and you always pick up little bits and bobs. Whether that's going to the Birmingham Royal Ballet and seeing the preparation they do to best prepare their team of dancers for competition, because their injury rates are like, they just don't get injured, even though they're doing these ridiculous feats and they're smoking all day. They just don't get injured. But you look at the preparatory work, they're doing heel raises, 50 heel raises every day just as part of their preparation. And you can draw from these experiences and apply them to the footballers and take from that. I went on a trip quite recently to Germany to look at Leverkusen and Dortmund and see the environments that they've got set up over there. And rightly or wrongly so, they're both two successful teams, but they completely differed in their approach. One was very clinical, the other was very more about team cohesiveness and togetherness. And it was fascinating drawing from those experiences as well. I'm very lucky in a sense that at the moment we've got a head of performance who's come from Australia, who's worked with a lot of high performance teams over there, and he's an incredibly smart individual, and you can really tap into him for tips and advice. And yeah, I'm certainly learning a lot at the moment from some of the recommendations he's given. So it never stops really, and I like these webinars and workshops and things like that. You always draw from little bits and bobs, but to actually go in and see hands-on experience of people working, that's where I've got a lot of my ideas from. I was very fortunate in the sense that when we were at Burton, our training ground was St George's Park. So just to give an explanation, the setup at Burton's in close proximity to St George's Park. They don't own a training ground, they rent St George's. So we report to the stadium, drive over to St George's Park, train there, drive back, get changed, and then we'd be done. We'd have like our own gym set up at the stadium. So while there, obviously when you had the likes of Hasselbank there, he'd know the people at Chelsea when they come over, so he'd be able to go and watch them train. And those opportunities to see those people train in that environment were invaluable, really. So, like I said, when you come in at the start of your career or at any point in your career, to get those experiences is a definite must. And I've seen time and time again practitioners who become institutionalised and stuck within a club without being asked to go and look at other people and seeing what they're doing. But you have to reach out and still touch base with other people.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of opportunities out there if you're willing to go and put yourself out and search for them, isn't there? But in terms of the role you're in now, Jack, when we're speaking to, because that's relating a bit more to practitioners that are in clubs and they can go and reach out to people and they can share some of the stuff that they're doing at their club. But what about some younger practitioners? What advice would you give to them that are trying to get that first step into the game?
The best bit of advice I can give them, because I don't want to be a hypocrite, because in my position, I get inundated with people asking for opportunities, internships, work programs, things like that, which a lot of the time I have to reject, and I'll try and give them advice at the same time. I think you can go down that route of asking people and sending letters, and look, if someone ignores you or says no, there's no harm lost. You're not going to do yourself an injustice. But I think what worked for me and what I can certainly suggest for other people to do is, one thing that is invaluable is experience. And like I said, there's still plenty of opportunities out there if you look in the right areas. So just because you're not getting experience at the top Premier League club or a Championship club doesn't mean that experience at lower league clubs or with individuals in other sports who are just starting on their career, that you can't have a mutually beneficial relationship with them. And that's where you need to be focusing your time. Still send those letters off to bigger clubs, but just don't get disheartened if you get rejected, because there's still plenty of other opportunities that you can go out and get. One thing that's been a shift in the industry while I've been working is the qualifications that you need to get these opportunities as well. So when I first started out, I didn't have any qualifications with regards to like UKSEA bases, and these are things that I've got accredited while in the job. But you see it time and time again now where internships require that, or you're working towards as a prerequisite to even being considered for that opportunity, which makes it equally as hard to get these jobs, because as we know, sports science is probably the most, it is the most populous degree in the country. There are around 11,000, 12,000 sports science graduates every year. So there's a lot of people vying for these smaller positions. So it's understandable that clubs are asking for these qualifications to try and whittle down who is actually going to improve the club and not. So rightly or wrongly so, that's the way it's gone. So there's those qualifications you work towards as well. But for me, get that experience where you can. And it doesn't matter that you haven't got a name tied to it as well. If you're an intern at a Man City or an intern at some lower league club, it doesn't matter. You're still gaining valuable experience. And for me, I probably respect this person who's worked in a restricted environment more than anything, because they know actually what's important. They know what they should and shouldn't be doing and how to act in that environment.
Yeah, I think loads of people on the podcast have said something similar. I think, thinking back, I think Dave Carolan said something about one of his early opportunities being where he learned the most because he had nothing. He didn't have many resources or anything like that. And that's where you do have to really get creative, isn't it? And start thinking outside the box.
Yeah. And you tend to find a lot of these practitioners have started from environments that have been outside the box. Chris Barnes was a lecturer before coming into sports science. Dave Carroll, as you said, came from an environment where there wasn't much opportunities there. You've got it's Ben Rosenblatt at England, who's not necessarily come from a football environment, but come from another environment. And even with myself, it wasn't a football environment, my training, it was outdoor sports. And you tend to find, actually, that these top-end practitioners have come from varying environments. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put all your eggs in one basket, in a sense, and say, okay, just going to get experience in football. See other sports as well. You can learn so much, like I said before, from visiting other people. Went to GB Rowan a few weeks ago. Sarah Mosley there, who's their lead sports scientist. I did the master's course with her at the same time, and she's gone down that direction. But the stuff you learn and the things that they're doing with those athletes is inspiring, really. So it's good to tap into what you can and people around you. And they come in different environments. Like when you're on a degree course, you'd be surprised how many people in that environment are actually going to go on to other areas that you can tap into later. So yeah, use them.
Yeah, that's the importance of your network, then, isn't it? And that you stay in touch with people, and because you never know where you're going to cross paths again in the future. I was going to ask Jack, just going forward, I know it's and we've done so well to go all this time without mentioning the current situation, but I was going to talk about what have you got coming up. Obviously, there's hopefully the rest of the season, but in terms of you personally, have you got any speaking engagements or anything coming up?
To be honest, no, not really. So one thing I'm trying to focus on more than anything is obviously getting the team to be physically stronger, and that takes up a lot of your time. I remember when I first started out, I had a lot of extra things on the side that I was doing. So I was doing obviously my job at Burton Albion, but then I had spin classes, I was doing PT, and I was doing all these other things at the same time to try and get a little bit extra income, which was understandable because I wasn't getting paid much. And I remember having a conversation with Gary out and explaining that I'm tired. I was doing all this stuff, like just in a passing conversation. It wasn't like I was moaning or anything. And I don't know why it always stuck with me. It says, if you really want to make it in this job, you have to focus 100% on it. And that's what I did. I just thought, do you know what? I am physically tired doing all this extra stuff. So I got rid of the classes, I got rid of the PT, I got rid of the boot camps, things like that, and just focused purely on the job. And that was a turning point in my career a little bit, just to say, do you know what? This is what I am. I don't need to focus on anything else. I'm going to focus directly on the job at hand. So I don't tend to do that much in a sense externally. I do want to try and add to the field of sports science, and there is research that's going to be coming out surrounding that multimechanical approach to quantifying training. So hopefully we can look at the lines of getting that published soon. But yeah, that's it really. I've got nothing to plug, unfortunately.
No, that's fine, mate. And then if anyone wants to reach out, Jack, if they've got questions or they want to reach out and ask anything, is there anywhere that they can do that?
Yeah. So I'm on social media platforms. I'm on Twitter, rarely on Instagram, but at Sharkey Stories is my handle. So I'm willing to give advice where needed. Like I said, I try and reply to as much as I can. Just give people a bit of advice when they're first starting out, because it can be a daunting time in your career, and it can be a bit upsetting, or not upsetting, but disheartening to not get any reply. So I'll try and reply as best as I can. But yeah, that's the best place to reach out.
That's awesome, mate. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Jack. I think there's been some great stuff there. And I'll put some links in regarding the previous podcast you did with Rob, but then also the webinar that you've done that's available. So I really encourage the guys to go and check that out as well, because I know some great stuff on there. So massive thank you for coming on, mate.
No problem at all. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, Jack.